This isn't just another financial scandal. This is the true story of how a 20-something Malaysian playboy with no official title, no real power, and no accountability orchestrated a $4.5 billion heist, not from a private company, not from the black market, but from his own country's sovereign wealth fund. His name is Jho Low, and between 2009 and 2015, he used a Malaysian government fund called 1MDB to pull off one of the most audacious thefts in modern history. With that money, he bought jets, mega yachts, mansions in Beverly Hills, diamonds for celebrities, and even produced The Wolf of Wall Street. He partied with Leonardo DiCaprio, gave Miranda Kerr millions in jewelry, and while the world watched, he disappeared. Today, he's a wanted fugitive with active arrest warrants from Malaysia, the United States, Singapore, Switzerland, and Interpol. And yet, he is believed to be living in luxury under state protection, somewhere in the shadows. The real questions are, how did he make it all look legal for so long, and who exactly helped him pull it off and get away with it? To answer these two questions, we need to go back to a time when a young man with charm, connections, and ambition found a willing partner at the very top of Malaysia's government. What followed was a masterclass in financial deception, political protection, and global complicity. Jho Low wasn't born into poverty. He came from a wealthy Malaysian Chinese family. Jho Low didn't stumble into wealth or power. He strategically built it from day one. As a teenager, he attended Harrow School in London, one of the most elite boarding schools in the world. But while others focused on grades, Jho focused on networking. His goal was clear: get close to the children of power, and the doors of power will follow. At Harrow, he befriended the sons of billionaires, Gulf royals, and future ministers. Then at Wharton, he polished his image further, throwing lavish parties, hosting dignitaries, and making himself indispensable in elite circles. Jho Low wasn't the smartest in the room, but he was always the most connected. By his early 20s, Jho Low began tapping those connections. Leveraging ties he built at Harrow and Wharton, he acted as a broker between Malaysia and Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds, especially Mubadala and IPIC from Abu Dhabi. These weren't small investments. They were multi-billion-dollar deals presented as strategic partnerships for Malaysia's development. The press praised Najib Razak for bringing Gulf investment into the country. What the public didn't see, Jho Low was the deal maker behind the scenes, and he made sure Najib got the credit. But how did Jho even get access to Najib in the first place? Through a family connection. Najib's son-in-law, Daniyar Nazarbayev, a Kazakh national who studied at the same time as Jho Low in the US. Through Daniyar, Jho Low got close to Najib and earned his trust as a young, Western-educated, well-connected fixer with global ambitions. The investment deals Jho Low delivered made Najib look like a visionary leader. But that wasn't the only reason Najib came to trust him without question. There was another figure, equally powerful behind the scenes, whose favor Jho Low carefully cultivated. Rosma Mansur, Najib's wife, had a reputation. Not for diplomacy, not for politics, but for her extravagant taste in luxury. From Paris boutiques to New York jewelers, Rosma had a hunger for wealth that only the world's richest could satisfy. And Jho Low, with billions flowing through offshore accounts, was more than happy to oblige. A $27 million pink diamond, dozens of Hermes Birkin bags, Cartier, Chanel, Dior, the list went on. These gifts weren't just about access, they were about loyalty. Jho Low ensured Najib's inner circle was indebted to him and dependent on him. By now, Jho Low wasn't just close to Najib, he was part of the family's financial ecosystem. And that's when he made his boldest move yet, not by taking power, but by controlling it invisibly. In 2009, the Malaysian government launched 1MDB, the One Malaysia Development Berhad Fund, to invest in infrastructure and national growth. But behind the scenes, it was Jho Low who shaped its strategy, picked its partners, and moved its money. Officially, he had no position, no title, no signature authority. But in practice, he made every major decision. Why? Because Najib Razak, as both Prime Minister and Finance Minister, controlled 1MDB directly. No board approvals, no ministry review. Just Najib's signature and Jho Low's instructions. It was the perfect setup for the perfect crime. Now that Jho Low had full access to 1MDB and total protection from Najib, the question becomes, how did he manage to move billions around the world without setting off alarms? The truth is chilling. He didn't hide in the shadows. He operated in plain sight, using legal systems, prestigious institutions, and paper trails that looked legitimate. The theft wasn't masked by darkness. It was cloaked in credibility. Here are the 5 techniques Jho Low used to make one of the largest financial crimes in history appear completely legal for years. Most Ponzi schemes collapse because the source of money is private or traceable. Jho Low's genius was in choosing 1MDB, a sovereign wealth fund backed by the Malaysian government. Sovereign wealth funds aren't like regular companies. They're often exempt from scrutiny, poorly audited, and managed at the discretion of top political leaders. In most governments, financial oversight is separated from political power. But in Malaysia, during the 1MDB years, Najib Razak held both roles, Prime Minister and Finance Minister. That meant he launched 1MDB, oversaw it legally, and personally approved every major deal. There was no internal opposition, no oversight committee, no one to challenge the numbers. And that made it easy for Jho Low to act as the invisible hand behind 1MDB, issuing instructions, selecting partners, wiring funds across borders, all with Najib's signature. If anyone raised questions, Najib's office shut them down. The man who was supposed to stop corruption was the one signing the checks. And Jho Low, he just whispered the instructions. Nothing builds credibility like a Wall Street giant. That's why Jho Low brought in Goldman Sachs, one of the most prestigious banks in the world. Between 2012 and 2013, Goldman helped 1MDB raise $6.5 billion in bonds, earning $600 million in fees, nearly 100 times the normal rate. But those deals were rushed, overpriced, and structured to hide risk. Internally, executives like Tim Leissner and Roger Ng signed off on suspicious deals, later admitting they were bribed and complicit. The result? The money was raised legally, on legal markets, with the backing of a globally trusted institution. No one suspected a thing. And by the time regulators caught up, the money was already gone. Once the billions were raised, they didn't go directly to Jho Low. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he created a maze of shell companies in offshore havens, like the British Virgin Islands and Seychelles, to launder the funds. One key example? Goodstar Limited, a company registered in the Seychelles and secretly controlled by Jho Low. On paper, it looked like a legitimate 1MDB partner, but in reality, it received $1.03 billion in 1MDB funds, which were then quietly diverted to personal accounts and luxury assets. Banks processed the transfers without question because the paperwork looked proper. Shell companies like Goodstar were set up to mimic 1MDB's real partners, hiding theft behind layers of fake business activity. It was money laundering dressed in legal documentation, and it fooled regulators worldwide. Every heist needs a cover story, and Jho Low's was national development. The stolen billions were said to be invested in energy and strategic partnerships, including a joint venture with Abar Investments, a real firm owned by Abu Dhabi. But here's the trick. Jho Low created a fake version of the company called Abar Investments PJS Limited, registered in the British Virgin Islands. It looked nearly identical to the real one. The logo, the name, even the email signatures matched. 1MDB sent $3.5 billion to the fake Abar, thinking it was going to a real project. But the money was immediately funneled to other shell firms. No real project ever existed. It was deception through design. A fake company, a fake deal, and real billions lost. Jho Low didn't steal $4.5 billion by himself. Behind every great financial crime is a web of enablers, people who profit, look away, or protect the guilty. Some knew exactly what was happening. Others chose not to ask questions, and together they formed the global scaffolding that allowed Jho Low to pull off and sustain the biggest heist of the 21st century. In the next slides, we'll uncover the roles of Najib Razak, the prime minister who signed it all; Goldman Sachs, the bank that raised the billions; offshore banks and lawyers who masked the money; Hollywood insiders who helped Jho Low launder his image; and the governments and regulators who simply didn't stop it. This is how systems fail, not by accident but by design. At the center of it all was Najib Razak, the man who created 1MDB, chaired its advisory board, and approved every transaction. Jho Low may have been the puppet master, but Najib held the pen that made every theft legal on paper. He allowed billions to flow out of Malaysia in exchange for loyalty, status, and wealth. Investigators later found that $681 million ended up in Najib's personal account. He claimed it was a donation. The courts didn't buy it. In 2020, Najib became the first Malaysian prime minister ever convicted of corruption. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, though he continues to seek royal pardon. But by then, Jho Low was long gone. Najib wasn't just complicit, he was the political shield that allowed the crime to happen. Goldman Sachs wasn't just a bystander, it was the engine that moved billions. Rather than ask hard questions, the bank's deal makers moved fast, structuring complex bond issuances that raised $6.5 billion for 1MDB in under 12 months. The bank earned $600 million in fees, a record-breaking cut that raised eyebrows even inside Wall Street. But behind closed doors, compliance systems were bypassed, documentation was doctored, and key red flags ignored. Tim Leissner, a Goldman partner, admitted in court to fabricating letters and lying to regulators. Roger Ng, another banker, was convicted for enabling the deal. Goldman later paid over $5 billion in global fines, a historic penalty that still didn't erase the role it played. More than money, Goldman gave Jho Low what he craved most: credibility. When one of the world's most prestigious banks backed 1MDB, it made everything look legitimate, even as it collapsed from the inside. Jho Low's billions didn't just sit in Malaysian accounts. They flowed through a network of private banks in Switzerland, Singapore, and the Caribbean. Among them, BSI Bank, shut down by Singapore in 2016, its first bank closure in over 30 years. Falcon Private Bank, also shut down for 1MDB violations, and RBS Coutts fined in Switzerland for enabling suspicious transfers linked to Jho Low. These banks ignored red flags, signed off on massive transfers, and failed basic compliance checks. In one case, a banker approved a $681 million transfer. No questions asked. Why? Because Jho Low's paperwork looked polished, and he had powerful friends. These banks weren't duped, they were complicit. Without them, the heist couldn't have happened at a global scale. Behind every shell company is a lawyer with a stamp. Jho Low worked with offshore law firms across the British Virgin Islands and Seychelles to create entities like Goodstar Limited and the fake A-Bar PJS Limited. These firms provided legal cover, filing paperwork, drafting contracts, and hiding ownership behind nominee directors. In Malaysia, firms like Wong & Partners, part of Baker McKenzie, helped structure elements of the deals. Meanwhile, Jho Low's network included lawyers close to Rosma, Najib's wife, who defended her lavish spending and access. And in one critical case, Goldman banker Tim Leissner, not a lawyer, forged legal letters to trick compliance teams. These weren't just service providers, they were enablers, giving legal form to criminal fraud. They made the fake real and the illegal invisible. Jho Low understood something few white-collar criminals ever master. The richer you look, the less people question you. He didn't just steal money, he used it to sculpt an image. In Hollywood, he became a mysterious billionaire backer of films, foundations, and luxury events. He wasn't promoting his name, he was promoting a persona: powerful, generous, untouchable. He funded parties where A-listers showed up because he made sure they didn't know too much. His link to the Wolf of Wall Street wasn't about cinema. It was about sending a message: I belong here. The glamour shielded the crime. Celebrities took the gifts, banks saw the headlines, politicians saw influence, and the public saw what Jho Low wanted them to see: success, not scandal. By the time the DOJ seized assets and forced returns, Jho Low's image had already served its purpose. It wasn't about hiding. It was about performing legitimacy and getting the world to applaud. And finally, there were the governments and regulators who should have stopped it, but didn't. In Malaysia, whistleblowers were silenced, journalists intimidated, and investigations stalled, all under Najib's government. In Switzerland and Singapore, banks reported red flags years too late. In the US, enforcement came only after exposés by the Wall Street Journal and other journalists. Even now, Jho Low remains at large, believed to be living in China or the UAE under some form of state protection. The system wasn't unaware, it was unwilling. Political relationships, business interests, and bureaucratic blind spots created the perfect storm. This wasn't just a heist. It was a global failure of accountability. By 2015, the silence around 1MDB began to crack. The first public expose came not from mainstream media, but from a blog. Sarawak Report, run by journalist Claire Rucastle Brown, published leaked documents and internal emails showing billions flowing out of 1MDB into secret accounts. Soon after, the Wall Street Journal picked up the trail, exposing a $681 million deposit into Najib's personal account. But Jho Low had already vanished. He fled Malaysia, reportedly passing through Macau, Shanghai, and the UAE, using private jets, aliases, and diplomatic cover. Despite Interpol red notices and arrest warrants from Malaysia, the US, Singapore, and Switzerland, Jho Low has never stood trial. He's believed to be living in luxury, somewhere. While the rest of the world waits, Jho Low didn't hack the system. He used it exactly as it was built. A system where a prime minister can approve his own deals, banks earn billions and ask no questions, lawyers draft paperwork without context, regulators act only when headlines force them. Jho Low was the perfect criminal for a global financial system based on reputation, not truth. He used the symbols of legitimacy, government bonds, legal contracts, luxury brands, to shield theft at massive scale. And the people who should have stopped him, they either profited, hesitated, or stayed silent. This wasn't just a story about Malaysia. It was a warning about how money, power, and narrative can bend the law in plain sight. Jho Low may have vanished, but the world that created him is still very much alive. The disappearance was never the real trick. He didn't just disappear from Interpol's radar, he disappeared from public accountability, from private jets to underground safe houses, from gala dinners to fake identities. He showed us that if you control enough money, you can write your own escape plan. But this story isn't about one man. It's about a system where money moves faster than justice, where global finance outpaces global regulation, where the ultra-wealthy operate in a dimension the rest of us can barely comprehend. The real question is, who's next? Jho Low is not an anomaly. He's a mirror, reflecting a world where too much power is hidden behind too many doors. This is why we created Wealth Decoded, to reveal the forces behind the headlines, to explore the hidden links between billionaires, policy, and power, to ask questions others won't. If this story made you feel anything, anger, curiosity, hope, then help us tell the next one. Subscribe, like, and share.